Now let's take a look at what are display properties in CSS. So display property tells the browser how the elements in the page behaves. Every element in a web page is essentially a rectangular box. So the display property helps us to tell the browser how to lay the elements on the screen. So let's take a look at some of the commonly used display properties. So first let's take a look at what are block elements. So block level elements take up as much horizontal space as they can, and they sit on a separate line from all the other elements. So let's take an example. Here we have a paragraph, and we have also added some styles to the universal selector. Now what we'll do is add an h1 in the middle of this paragraph. So here we'll type h1 and we'll say block element. So here we see that h1 takes up the complete horizontal space, and it breaks the flow of the text. And now even if we change this to div, and we can see that the same thing happens. The block element takes up the complete horizontal space. This is because these elements are block level elements, and the main property of this block level element is that it takes up the complete horizontal space. And we can also add height and width to this division. So let's go to our style.css, and here we'll type div, and first of all let's give it a background color. So we'll type turquoise over here. And now if we change the height to say 100 pixels and the width to 200 pixels, we can see the height and the width are applied on this division. But even though the width of this element is just 200 pixels, the complete horizontal space is blocked for the other elements. So this is how display of block works. Here's a list of some other block level elements. Now the next display value is inline. So when you have an inline element, it doesn't break the flow of the text. So let's take an example over here. So we'll change this division to span. So span is an inline element, and let's also change this to inline. So now if I save this, we can see that the inline element is right here. It is inside the text and it doesn't break the flow of the text. Now let's go to our style.css, and we'll add some styles over here to the span. So here we will give it a background color of red, and here we can see this is our inline element, and here we can see that it clearly takes up just the space it needs. So if you type height of say 100 pixels and width of 200 pixels, we can see that it doesn't affect the inline element. We can even add padding and border to our inline element. So we'll type padding of 4 pixels, and here we have a padding of 4 pixels. We'll just add a border of 4 pixels solid black, and here we have the border and the padding being applied. Now here we can clearly see that it doesn't affect any other lines of text. So even if we increase this padding, so we'll just change this to 24 pixels, we can see that the other lines of text are right there. So an inline element doesn't affect the other lines of text. So let's change this back to 4 pixels. Now we can even add margin to an inline element, but only a horizontal margin is applied to the inline element. So if you type margin top of say 100 pixels, it doesn't work. But if you type margin left of 100 pixels, we can see that it works because it doesn't affect the other lines of text. So this is basically how inline elements work in a web page. Here's a list of some inline elements in HTML. Now let's take a look at what are inline block elements. So I'll just change this to inline block. We just delete some words over here to make it sit on a single line, and we'll also remove this margin for now. Now here we have our element, but this is still an inline element. So let's change this to an inline block element. To change the display property of an element, you have to just type display and then type the value over here. So we'll type inline block, and now if I save this, we can see that height and width are applied to our element. So the main reason why you want to use an inline block element is to have the properties of the inline element and also need to have height and width applied to it. So this is basically how inline block elements work in CSS. Now let's take a look at one more value for display. It is called none. So if you set the display to none, the element will disappear from the page. So now if I save this, we can see the element is no longer in the screen. So display of none is used to hide an element from the page. So these are the commonly used display values. There are a lot more different values which you can use for display. Using display flex, you can use flexbox in CSS, which is a new way to lay out your web page. You can also use CSS grid by typing display grid. Now flexbox and CSS grid are a bit more advanced topics. I just want to keep this crash course simple. By the way, we will be using flexbox in our course when we start designing our website. Alright, so that's basically it with display property in CSS.